Chapter 2. The Cat. Princess Lingli, a year and a half from her birth, was proving quite precocious. A very healthy child indeed. Mama wasn't a big fan of children, but even she had to admit that the princess was endearing. It was certainly more pleasant taking care of her than looking after one of the girls who had been sold into the brothel. There's no creature in the world so insufferable as a preteen girl. The princess had graduated from holding on to things in order to get around to walking on her own, and recently to jogging short distances. Consort Gyokyo watched her pound around with a touch of concern. "I wonder if this residence is starting to get a little small for her," she said. The Jade Pavilion was hardly cramped, but it wasn't healthy for a child to play inside all the time. There was a central garden as well, but soon it wouldn't be enough to hold the princess's interest. "Perhaps it might be all right to take her for a little walk." Gyokyo was uncommonly open-minded. Most nobles felt that young ladies of prominent heritage should spend their days safely indoors, swaddled in the finest silks. Evidently, Consort Gyokyo didn't agree. "What do you think, Mao Mao?" Mama looked up and grunted softly, somewhat surprised to have the consort suddenly ask for her opinion. "In terms of her health, I think it would be wonderful if she had more chances to go outside." Mama looked at Gyokyo's feet. They were well built and perfectly large enough. They hadn't been bound when she was young. In the arid western regions where she had been born and raised, Gyokyo seemed to have received a somewhat more permissive upbringing than many of the other consorts. Generally speaking, it was regarded as best to let a child's mother set the tone for their rearing, but this particular child happened to be the daughter of the most important man in the nation and the apple of his eye. They couldn't expect him to simply nod along and let Gyokyo do whatever she wanted. The consort, of course, understood this very well. "I'll ask about it then," she said, running her fingers through Lingli's hair where the child had fallen asleep on the couch. Several days later, permission had been granted for the princess to go outside, accompanied by 2 eunuchs as guards. Mamao and Hongyang were to go with her. It was just a little walk, but the emperor could be pretty protective. Then again, all of his children had died young so far, so maybe he had reason to be. "I know you know a lot about flowers and animals, Mamao. Maybe you could teach her," Gyokyo said, patting the princess's head. Her belly was already heavy, so she had to stay behind at the Jade Pavilion just to be safe. "Don't give her ideas, Lady Gyokyo. She'll teach the princess the most positively awful things," Hongyang insisted, but the consort acted surprised. "Goodness, I should think her instruction might be helpful." The hint of an elegant smile appeared on her face. "After all, one never knows where one might go in marriage in the future." I knew she was a shrewd one, Mama thought. The princess might still be young, but given her place in life in another 10 years or so, there was every chance she would be married into another family somewhere. If she was granted to some loyal subject, well and good, but it was distinctly possible she would go to live in some other country, somewhere she might not be entirely welcome. In such a situation, a working knowledge of drugs and poisons couldn't go amiss. Hongyang acceded with a sigh. Though obviously not thrilled, she understood the logic just as well as Mamao. Gyokyo waved at Princess Lingli as she left on her walk, and the princess waved back. Then she squealed, seeing the outside of the Jade Pavilion for the first time. She could only taste so much of the outside world from the pavilion courtyard. She still only knew a few words, and most of them didn't make very much sense, but nonetheless she was clearly excited to see so many palace women, far more than there were in her own house. Mama had worried the child might be afraid and start crying, but far from it. She had her mother's daring. Lingli pattered along, exclaiming frequently. Sometimes she would point at something, and Mamao or Hongyang would tell her what it was called. It was hard to say how much she really understood, but she would burble "murmur" in response, so maybe some of the words made sense to her. The eunuch guards kept a respectful distance, not too close but never too far. Young children were a rare sight in the rear palace. Indeed, Lingli was the only one under 10 in the entire complex, and she naturally attracted the women's attention. Some couldn't suppress a smile to see a child for the first time in so long. Others, realizing she was a princess, took a respectful step back, and still others simply looked at her with no particular expression at all. The young princess was oblivious to all of this, but as she grew up, she would come to understand the significance of those looks. Hongyang, who was holding Lingli's hand, had her work cut out for her as the princess flitted from one thing to the next, bursting with curiosity. The plan had been to walk to the cherry grove that lay west of the Jade Pavilion, pick some cherries, and then come home, but they seemed to keep finding detours and diversions. Finally, they spotted the western gate, Hongyang openly relieved to have reached their destination. They heard a high-pitched growl. Row! It sounded almost like an infant, so that Mau Mau and Hongyang briefly thought it was Lingli, but the princess was looking around for the source of the sound too. Suddenly, she darted off. Hongyang scrambled after her as she peered between some storage buildings. No, princess, don't! Hongyang called. At the same moment, there came another cry, mew, before Lingli could disappear among the buildings. Mau Mau squeezed herself between the storehouses with a, I'll go have a look. Mau Mau, Hongyang said. Meow, meow, Lingli squealed at the same time. Hongyang had no choice but to step back while Mau Mau continued after their charge. She saw something glimmer golden in the gloom. She reached out toward it, but it slipped between her feet and ran off. Meow! Princess, Hongyang said, holding Lingli back. A small, grimy ball of fur appeared from between the buildings. The fur ball took fright at the sudden sight of humans and tried to run. Its hair stood on end and its tail stuck up. Meow! The princess pointed at the fuzzball, indicating she wanted them to catch it. Mau Mau had just extricated herself from between the storehouses, but she wasn't in any position to jump on a small animal. It's going to get away, she thought. But at that moment, someone appeared behind the ball of fur. The little creature was so focused on Mau Mau, Hongyang, and Lingli that the new arrival easily swept it up in her hands. Their helper was another palace woman, someone Mau Mau didn't recognize. Is this yours? She asked, sounding surprisingly girlish. Although she was tall, she had a young face. She might have been Mau Mau's age or perhaps younger. She wore the same uniform as Xiaolon and seemed a touch ditzy. Thank you, Mau Mau said. The other woman held the filthy, shivering lump of fuzz out to her. Mau Mau took out a handkerchief and wrapped it around the animal. She could feel it shaking even through the cloth, and it cried, meow, pleadingly. It had run only out of fear and had exhausted itself doing so she could feel how limp it was. I'll bet it's hungry, the woman said. Maybe you can feed it. Anyway, see you. Then she went on her way with a wave. Whatever. Mau Mau had the fur ball, so she considered this a success. She took the animal over to the princess. Hongyang studied it. Mau Mau, is that? She raised an eyebrow with a disapproving look. Meow, meow, the princess cooed, apparently meaning, let me see. It is indeed a cat. The tiny kitten curled in her handkerchief was still shivering. Princess Lingli was entranced by the tiny, unfamiliar life form. She continually badgered Mau Mau to show it to her, crying meow, meow in imitation of the kitten's mewling. But Mau Mau knew Hongyang would never let the princess touch the grimy little thing. She couldn't simply leave it to her own devices, though, so they cut their walk short and went back to the Jade Pavilion. Notwithstanding the princess's attachment to the kitten, something so unsanitary couldn't be allowed in the consort's residence. Ultimately, they distracted the princess with her favorite snack while Mau Mau spirited the animal away to the medical office. It seemed like the obvious place, for without care the creature was going to die. Mau Mau was much perplexed, though. Yes, the warm season was when wild animals would be breeding, but that was a matter for the world outside the rear palace. Within its walls, there were hardly any pets to speak of. A small handful of the consorts had birds from other lands, but they kept them in cages, and there weren't any dogs, cats, or anything else of the sort around. Special permission was required to keep a pet, and it was forbidden for male and female animals to be kept together. If and when they arrived, male animals were castrated just like male humans. It might sound harsh, but it was precisely to prevent any trouble should they escape. The rear palace couldn't have animals breeding willy-nilly all over its vast grounds. They had come to a compromise. Hongyang agreed that the cat could stay for the time being, but she said the higher-ups had to be informed. Oh, this is a surprise, the quack doctor said. Calm as ever, he didn't seem to be thinking very hard about why Mau Mau had a cat with her. He saw that it was shivering, though, which provoked a compassionate frown. The doctor set some water on to boil. When it was good and warm, he put it in a wine bottle, wrapped the bottle in a cloth, and placed it in the basket where they had put the kitten. Looks like you know just what to do. Not the first cat I've taken in. I had the sweetest calico once. By sheer coincidence, the kitten also happened to be a calico. As they wiped away the filth on its fur with a damp rag, they saw the patches of reddish brown and black fur. The kitten had its milk teeth, but it was terribly undernourished. Mau Mau could feel its rib cage under her fingers. You wouldn't have any milk, would you? She asked. Its mother's milk would be best, but they could hardly go out searching for her now. It hadn't looked to Mau Mau like there had been any other cats around when they'd found the kitten anyway. I think I can go get some, the quack said, and darted out of the office. As the palace physician, he had a fair amount of pull in the kitchen. As Mau Mau continued to rub the milk-starved kitten with a rag, she picked fleas off of it, tossing them in oil to kill them. She would have liked to simply dip the animal in some hot water to get rid of them all at once, but considering the kitten's physical state, wiping it down was the most she could do. A few minutes later, the doctor came trotting back with a stew pot. They had goat's milk at least. He held out the pot. Mau dipped a finger in it and found it was exactly the right temperature. She made sure her fingertip was wet with milk, then brought it to the kitten's mouth. The tiny animal began half nibbling, half lapping at her finger. She did this several times, the quack watching them both fondly. "What a sweetie," he said. Mau hated to take advantage of him just because he was acting like an especially soft touch, but she decided to ask him for one more favor. "Would it be possible for you to obtain some tripe?" Given the number of people in the rear palace, the kitchen must slaughter several animals every day. Sausage was occasionally served at mealtimes, so Mau knew they didn't simply throw the organs away. Tripe? Well, I suppose, but whatever for?" The kitten was so weak that it seemed like it would be a while until it had recovered enough even to drink milk from a saucer. Feeding it one fingertip's worth at a time, though, was time-consuming. Mau had thought she might be able to appropriate some intestines to simulate a parent's nipple. When she explained this to the quack, he went rushing off again to the dining area, truly a generous-hearted man. In the meantime, Mau continued to feed goat's milk to the small cat as much as it would drink. Several days later, they had mostly managed to clean the kitten up, and its fur was starting to regain some of its luster. Mau had briefly worried whether the goat's milk would sit well with it, but the kitten seemed to have taken it quite well. Ordinarily, they would probably have had to toss the cat out of the rear palace immediately, but for better or for worse, the night they found the animal, the emperor had happened to visit the Jade Pavilion. When he heard his little princess incessantly claiming, "Meow, meow," he couldn't deny her the source of her pleasure. And who should be charged with the animal's care but, of course, Mau. "Her name already means cat. They're the perfect match," the emperor had joked. Mau hadn't been quite sure whether she should laugh or not, but as consort Gyokyo chuckled, Mau at least managed a polite smile. She figured eventually she would be able to foist the thing off on the doctor, as if she hadn't mostly already done that. The princess couldn't yet enjoy the kitten's company because it still had some fleas, and more importantly because however small it might have been, it was still a wild animal. Mau promised to share the kitten with Lingli when it got a little bit stronger. When the kitten was recovered enough to tolerate it, Mau dunked it in a wash basin and gave it a bath. It immediately looked substantially cleaner, but when she scrubbed it with some soap, the water turned gray. Its undercoat was still dirty. When Mau suggested that the kitten's soft white fur would make an excellent riding brush, the doctor clutched the animal protectively, shaking his head. She'd meant it as a joke, but as 2 brand new brushes appeared for her shortly thereafter, she decided she had come out ahead. After the kitten had enough time drinking nourishing milk, they added minced chicken to its diet. They gave it a small box full of sand where it promptly learned to do its business. It still had trouble doing number 2 without having its anus stimulated, though. The quack was kind enough to use a damp rag to help the kitten out. Its teeth were still small, but meanwhile they clipped and filed its nails. Not an easy procedure on a kitten, but if it accidentally scratched someone or something, they would never hear the end of it. Seemed like a good idea at the time anyway, Mau thought, letting out a long sigh. Just then, someone arrived at the medical office. "And how's our little one doing?" The source of the light-hearted quip was Jinshi. Gaoshun was with him as ever, and he was carrying some sort of bag. "I think the princess should be able to see her soon," Mau replied. "The only problem is I don't have a plan yet for if the animal scratches her or tries to run away." "Oh, you're always so caught up in details." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one who would suffer the consequences if anything went wrong. Mau glanced over toward the animal in question to discover Gaoshun had produced some dried fish from the bag and was waving it in front of the kitten. The customary furrow in his brow was gone, and he even appeared to be smiling. So he had a playful streak. "Master Gaoshun, I think that might be a little hard for our kitten yet. Perhaps I could boil it." The quack already had a pot ready to go, as if he had been waiting for this moment. You couldn't count on him to do his own job, but he came through at times like this. Jinshi snatched the cat up and stretched it out, examining its little belly. "Female?" he asked. "Yes, no need to castrate it, fortunately." The words were out of Mama's mouth before she realized that perhaps it wasn't something to say so lightly in his company. "I'm sorry, sir," she added. "No, think nothing of it," Jinshi replied, though she couldn't quite read his expression. Still feeling apologetic, Mama went in search of some kind of snack and came up with the last of the sausages they'd made for the leftover tripe. She'd packed them with meat and fragrant herbs and boiled them, not wanting anything to go to waste. Then she stopped for a second and thought about it. "Something wrong?" Jinshi asked. "No, sir." Mama put the sausage back on the shelf and picked out some rice crackers instead. The doctor, meanwhile, had a distant look on his face as he ate. Jinshi amused himself by playing with the cat. He dangled the ornament that normally hung at his hip in front of the kitten and pretended not to notice Gaoxuan watching him with deep concern. He did, though, notice Mau Mau looking at him. He turned to her and held out the ornament as if to ask whether she wanted to play with the kitten, too. "I'm not much of a cat person," she said. "With your name?" He wasn't the first person to say that. "You seem to quite like her, Master Jinshi." "Not particularly." He looked at Gaoxuan, who was working with the doctor to boil the dried fish. Two middle-aged men putting themselves out for a kitten, Mama thought. "I'm not sure what's supposed to be so good about them," Jinshi went on. He was still eyeing the two men, who were gradually beginning to sound like they were purring themselves as they cooed over the kitten. Frankly, it was disgusting. His look seemed to say he could never be like them. "I agree with you," Mama said, looking at the kitten. "But according to the cat lovers I know, the fact that you can never tell what they're thinking is part of the appeal." "Goodness." "You look at them long enough and you discover you can't look away." Then gradually you find yourself eager to pet the cat." I see. "It may annoy you that they may act affectionate only when you have food, remaining aloof at all other times." Well, yes." "But when you're in that deep, all you can really do is forgive them for their foibles." Finally, Jinshi didn't respond at all. Over time, Mama was given to understand one came to want to kiss the cat, even though it wouldn't like it, then to play with its cute little toe beans, and finally to touch that fuzzy-wuzzy belly, even knowing a good scratching was the inevitable result. Mama saw it as positively unsanitary to do such things with an animal that went around who knew where doing who knew what, but cat lovers apparently couldn't help themselves. She looked at Jinshi, full of disdain for all of this, to discover the kitten on his face. "Whatever are you doing, Master Jinshi?" If he wanted to touch the cat's fuzzy-wuzzy belly, fine, but Mau Mau glanced out the window, worried what might happen if someone were to see him that way. "Oh, nothing," Jinshi said. "But I feel like maybe I have more sympathy for those cat people than I did before." He sounded as if he had come to some realization. Let us present from the question of exactly what he had realized. "I see. Well, it appears the fish is ready." Yes, of course." Realizing that Gaoxuan and the doctor were looking in his direction, Jinshi quickly put the cat down. "What are you doing, sir?" Gaoxuan asked, his tone polite, but his gaze sincerely jealous. Ultimately, even Jinshi was at a loss as to where exactly the kitten had come from. Plenty of wagons came and went in the rear palace, though, loaded with provisions. The simplest inference was that the kitten had wandered in after one of them, lured by the scent of food, and had gone unnoticed until the princess found her. Not long after, the kitten was awarded an official rank by the emperor, being granted the illustrious-sounding title Admonisher of Thieves. All that really meant was that she would help keep the medical office free of mice. The emperor certainly had a soft spot for his daughter. The cat was given a name that meant furry. It stuck in Mau Mau's craw for one simple reason. This name, too, was pronounced Mau Mau. Chapter 3. The Caravan. The season was turning, bringing an unpleasant heat and humidity. Mau Mau reflected on how quickly time passed as she gathered up fragrant herbs to use to ward off the bugs. "I think it's time to change the wardrobe over," Hongyang, Consort Gyokyo's chief lady-in-waiting, said, and if she thought it was time, then it was time. Thus the ladies-in-waiting found themselves laboring away among the clothing. "So many dowdy old fashions," Yinghua huffed, standing in front of a dresser. She, Mau Mau, and Ailan were handling this job while Gai Yuan looked after the young princess. "Ailan, grab that thing on the topmost shelf for me," Yinghua instructed, craning her neck to look up at the shelf. Ailan was the tallest of them, a fact she was self-conscious about, but which was quite convenient for reaching things in high places. After she had dragged a trunk down from the top of the shelf, the rather shorter Mau Mau and Yinghua inspected the contents. They sorted the clothing into different categories and put them on poles to air out in the shade. I guess this one wouldn't be too embarrassing," Yinghua said. She was sorting the clothes into those in which one could still be caught dead and those in which one could not. To Mau Mau, all the outfits looked equally sumptuous, but Yinghua was accustomed to the finer things and proved more discriminating. "This sort of thing used to be really popular once, but it's better to avoid fads. Once they go, you're left with stuff you can't use." Mau Mau took the outfits deemed no longer viable and stuffed them back into the chest, then trundled into the hallway with it. These garments may have been old or outdated, but they still had belonged to one of the upper consorts. They were made of the finest material and would be reworked or repaired and then gifted to other people. Not to the ladies-in-waiting of the Jade Pavilion personally, but rather to their families. Ladies-in-waiting sometimes received hair sticks or other accessories, but clothing like this was not something one could get away with parading around near the rear palace. The craftsmen would rework the outfits, and in their new forms, they would be distributed in Gyokyo's hometown. Pulling down another box, Ailan said, "You know, I heard new ladies in waiting will be coming before long," as if the thought had just occurred to her. "With Lady Gyokyo pregnant, we'll need more hands around here, and it would attract attention if we were the only place to get new women. So instead, they're going to give all the consorts a chance to expand their retinues." Yinghwa's mouth hung open slightly at that. "What? All of a sudden? I mean, I'm happy to hear that, but—" "They found a good reason," Ailan said. "Think about it. When one consort shows up with more than 50 attendants, how are the other women supposed to feel?" "Yeah, I see what you mean," Yinghua said, her face darkening briefly. Mao Mao too understood what Ailan was talking about, or rather whom, Consort Lowland, who had entered the rear palace with tremendous fanfare. For the emperor's favorite consort, by contrast, to have a measly 5 women simply didn't look good. "Did she even try to make do with fewer women?" said Yinghua. "Watch it, Yinghua, or you'll get another taste of Hangyang's iron hammer," Ailan responded. Yinghua promptly clapped her hands over her mouth. Mao Mao, meanwhile, concentrated single-mindedly on putting the unwanted clothes in chests and carrying them out. In this way, they carried on, chatting and working, until they had discarded almost half of the summer clothes. "We did get rid of a lot," Mao Mao said, puzzled. "But how will we manage now?" "Not to worry," Ailan said with a smile. "We've already commissioned a few new sets of clothes from the craftsmen." "And a caravan will be coming soon. We can buy more then," Yinghua added. Ailan gave her a reproachful look for stealing her thunder. "A caravan?" Mao Mao said. "Yeah, that's right," Yinghua replied, brushing her hand along one outfit to check the feel of the silk. "It's supposed to be even bigger than usual this time." The excitement was evident in her voice. Perhaps the thought of it was what made her hand stop moving. Caravans had once been groups of merchants who crossed the desert together, but the word had come to refer to any traveling sellers who visited, willing to engage in trade. Sometimes they did bring unusual items from strange lands, so the word wasn't entirely inaccurate, but still it didn't quite feel right. The last caravan had visited during the time when Mao Mao had been effectively exiled from the rear palace, and the time before that she had been a mere maid, unable to involve herself with such festivities. She had dealt with merchants in the pleasure district, so they didn't hold any particular fascination for her, but the idea was understandably exciting in the rear palace, where distractions were few and far between. "You should go have a look, Mao Mao. We'll make sure you have some time in your schedule. Lady Gyokyo usually gives us a little pocket money for things like this." Yinghua grinned. It happened just as a smile was crossing her face. Mao Mao and Ailan froze. Yinghua looked at them, confused, and they both pointed behind her. Yinghua turned around slowly to find Hangyang hovering over her like a storm cloud. The chief lady-in-waiting wore a tight, crooked smile. Yinghua almost choked, but managed a feeble grin. "I heard a lot of talking, but I don't see a lot of sorting," Hangyang said. What? Mao Mao and Ailan, for their part, promptly set about folding clothes. Yinghua's mouth opened in an expression of betrayal. "I do want that pocket change," Mao Mao thought. The incident, allegedly, cost Yinghua a bit of her spending money. The rear palace was a big place, bigger than some towns. The women who worked there existed purely to serve the consorts, to keep up the buildings, and to hope for the vanishingly small chance that the emperor might choose them for a bedmate. The unique situation bred rhythms and rituals of daily life that were likewise different from what one would find in an average city. As the roles of the palace women were broken down into cleaning, laundry, and cooking, it might be best to think of the place not as a city unto itself, but like a single giant household in which they all lived. Yet in this whole huge place, it was impossible to find one particular thing that might have been expected. What was it? A shop of any kind. "It looks like so much fun!" Mao Mao met Xiaolan's remark with a question. "You think so?" Xiaolan still seemed like a girl in some ways. Palace women walked gaily among the tents set up in the plaza. The tents were packed close together, and with nearly 2,000 women serving in the rear palace, there was no room for the lower-ranking maids to squeeze in for a look. Unable to even admire the merchandise, the most they could do was to live vicariously by watching the other ladies admire it. Mao Mao and Xiaolan were leaning against the railing of the room where the maids slept. Since the consorts and their ladies-in-waiting were all out having fun today, the minions had virtually nothing to occupy their time. "Lucky them. I wish I could get some new clothes," Xiaolan sighed, resting her chin on the railing. "But you don't have anywhere to wear them." "I know that, but I still want them." The lowest ranking of the palace women were generally only given work uniforms, 3 in the summer, 2 in the winter, and new outfits were provided only when an old one had worn out. Other necessities, including hairbands and underwear, were likewise provided. Meals were served in the dining hall each day. The families of the better-bred palace women might send gifts along with their letters, while the ladies-in-waiting of consorts might be given clothing or accessories by their mistress, not to mention snacks. Gyokyo, for example, had granted Ailan paper on which to make her copies of the book. With no shops around, none of these things were easy to come by. For Xiaolan, who had no powerful backer, no backer of any kind in fact, chances to acquire new personal possessions were rare, and when they came, they went, well, like this. Only after the other ladies had been through the wares would she have a chance to pick through the leftovers for whatever she could afford with the paltry savings in her purse. It was a strange feeling to see these shops all lined up here in the rear palace. The excitement in the air was palpable. And only our quack to serve the whole lot, Mama thought. One might assume that any illness in a place this large would spread like wildfire, but in practice that wasn't true. Sanitation in the rear palace was excellent. The palace women spent much of their time cleaning, and waste was dealt with efficiently. When enough of it had built up, it was flushed into the sewers, whence it went, not to the moat, but out to the great river. The moat was thus kept free of filth and stench. The former emperor had utilized this site because there was already an existing sewer here, a technology that had apparently come from the west. Talk had it that the rear palace had once been an actual city, refashioned to serve its current purpose. Both the walls and moat had belonged to that city, so that despite its size, building the rear palace had actually been fairly economical. It was perhaps not surprising to hear that the prime mover behind the project had been the haughty but effective Empress Regnant. Such sanitation measures alone went a long way in preventing the outbreak of illness. Although, if anyone did get especially sick, she was sent back home to her family, so the little world of the rear palace went round, with or without a quack for a doctor.
Mau, I think I could get a little time off on the last day,
Xiaolan said. Her eyes were sparkling. Apparently, this was an invitation to check out the shopping with her. Mamo had to admit she was pleased to be asked. She answered Xiaolan with a pat on the head. When she got back to the Jade Pavilion, Mamo was greeted by the sight of some tired but satisfied ladies-in-waiting. While she had been out slacking, having virtually nothing to do, some merchants had come to the pavilion. The highest-ranking ladies of the rear palace didn't have to trouble themselves to go out to the shops. The shops came to them. The merchants were all women, for how else were they to be admitted to the rear palace? Nonetheless, there were more eunuch bodyguards than usual around, just in case anything should happen. They were familiar men, though, and the girls were sipping some tea, the pavilion's domestic atmosphere undisturbed by the presence of the additional guards.
His Majesty said Lady Gyokyo could choose anything she liked.
Yinghua sounded as pleased as if she herself had been the one to receive this dispensation. She'd been terribly disappointed to have her spending money cut in half, but she seemed to have bounced back. On the table was a stunning jade necklace, the same color as Gyokyo's eyes. There was also quartz glass and an accessory box inlaid with mother of pearl. Princess Lingli was thoroughly satisfied with a pretty silk ball she'd gotten, and in addition to clothes for the consort, a tiny robe for Lingli hung on the wall.
Perhaps I've had a little too much excitement,
Gyokyo said with a touch of concern. If anything, ma'am, I think you could have stood to buy more, her chief lady-in-waiting, Hongyang said, somewhat emphatically. I'm sure the other ladies all did. Hongyang chose a restrained way of expressing herself, but Mamo could easily imagine what she meant. Liwa's ladies at the Crystal Pavilion, all talk and no work, had no doubt gorged themselves on shopping. Consort Liwa had plenty to spend, and presumably plenty was indeed spent. Over at the Diamond Pavilion, Consort Lishu's ladies-in-waiting had, one might guess, goaded their lady into purchasing things they wanted. The best one could hope for was that they didn't outright embezzle anything. As for the Garnet Pavilion, well, Consort Lowland's penchant for conspicuous clothing consumption spoke for itself. Consort Gyokyo, who, by contrast, had purchased hardly enough to fill a single room, seemed downright frugal to Mau Mau, especially for someone with the Emperor's personal affection. The consorts each drew a salary commensurate with their jobs, but they were also reimbursed for clothing and accessories, which were considered necessary expenses. The upper, middle, and lower consorts came to almost 100 people altogether, and Mau Mau found herself wondering if the national treasury was going to hold out at this rate. That was something she didn't need to worry about, though. In any case, others will come tomorrow, so I'm going to put away today's purchases. Hongyang started pulling outfits down off the wall, handing them off to Mau Mau. Each was richly colored and pleasant to the touch. It was then that Mau Mau noticed these clothes were of a slightly different make than the ones Gyokyo normally preferred. The consort usually liked to pair a sleeveless dress with a long skirt and then wear an overgarment with wide sleeves on top of it. But these dresses all had proper sleeves accompanied by skirts that were to be tied with a sash just under the chest. Mau Mau had a good guess at the reason. Consort Gyokyo would shortly be finding sashes difficult to tie across her midriff. Was this the only type of thing they had? Mau Mau asked. What? Hongyang replied. The merchants swore they were all the rage. So these were all they had. The ladies in waiting looked at each other questioningly. The women of the Jade Pavilion had done their shopping with only thoughts of Gyokyo in their minds, but one would normally have expected a wider selection, and if one followed that fact to the assumption the merchants had been making, no, Mau Mau must have been overthinking it. At least I hope I am. Because if they had deliberately brought only this type of clothing to Consort Gyokyo, it might suggest they had been trying to sound her out. I think tomorrow you should ask them if they don't have some outfits with lower sashes, Mau Mau said. She thought perhaps it wasn't her place, but Gyokyo and Hongyang both seemed to take her meaning. The other three ladies in waiting looked at each other again, but Mau Mau's insinuation had clearly gone over their heads. That's a good idea. We should get a little more variety, Gyokyo said, setting some clothes on top of a box. Perhaps it was her imagination, but Mau Mau thought she saw a keen light flash through the ladies' eyes. The caravan would stay for 5 days, during which the ladies of the rear palace would have an unaccustomed chance to enjoy some shopping. The highest-ranking consorts had no need to go out to the shops, so it was first the middle and lower-ranking consorts and their ladies-in-waiting who circulated among the merchant tents, followed by the women in administrative positions, each whittling down the selection further as they bought whatever caught their eye. Only on the last day did the women of the lowest ranks have an opportunity to sift through whatever was left. The fact that even that seemed to be an exciting prospect spoke to how few diversions there were around here. This caravan had come across the desert and carried many unusual wares from exotic lands. It must have passed through Gyokyo's homeland as well, for the women of the Jade Pavilion looked noticeably homesick as they studied the handicrafts. Mau Mau was far more interested in any medicines or drugs that might be available, but such were understandably barred from being brought directly into the rear palace. Tea leaves and spices, sold almost as an afterthought, were as close as the merchants came. On the final day, Mau Mau, with a bit of spending money from Consort Gyokyo, went to the market with Shalon just as she had promised.
Wow, I can't believe it!
Shalon hardly had a coin to her name and couldn't afford anything on display, but that didn't stop her eyes from sparkling at an array of Western glasswork. Mau Mau found Shalon's lack of affection charming. This one, please. Mau Mau picked out an especially attractive hairband and gently tied it in Shalon's hair. The deep peach-pink color suited her energy perfectly. It only took Shalon a second to notice something had happened, and then she was almost knocking Mau Mau over, hugging her. Mau Mau wondered if this was what it would be like to have a little sister.
You aren't going to buy any clothes, Mau Mau?
Shalon asked. Don't need any. Partly, she didn't want to make a show of buying things in front of Shalon, but more importantly, she really wasn't interested in clothes. She was far more attracted to the teas and spices. Shalon, almost giddy over her new hairband, was more than happy to accompany Mau Mau to the shops that most interested her. She had a gigantic smile on her face the entire time. Apparently, it was just that much fun for her to window shop at these crude carts turned market stalls. Mau Mau was determined to buy some of the tea and spices. The ladies of the Jade Pavilion had taken it in turns to come to the market over the final 3 days of the caravan's visit, and Mau Mau had said she was content to go on the last day. This was the reason. Last day means discounts. Mau Mau wasn't interested in gems, trendy clothing, or any of that stuff. The goods she was after were of small consequence to everyone else, so she was sure that there would be plenty left over. Besides, this was the rear palace, a special place. A bit of good-natured ripping off was to be expected. If they think they're going to take me for a ride, though. Mau Mau's wiles were sharp. She'd spent most of her life watching the old madam do business, after all. She stopped at one of the shops selling tea. A quartz goldfish bowl was filled with pretty little buds tied into balls. Jasmine tea. When steeped in hot water, the buds would open, as pleasant to see as they were to smell as the tea released its lovely aroma. Sadly, it had mostly been bought up. There were only 3 buds left. I'll take this, Mau Mau said. But at the exact same moment, another voice said, This one, please! Mau Mau looked over to discover someone pointing at the same bowl. It was a palace woman about a half a head taller than Mau Mau, although in spite of her height, she still looked and sounded quite young. The contrast left Mau Mau blinking. She couldn't shake the sense that she'd seen the girl somewhere before. The other girl looked almost as confused as Mau Mau, then she exclaimed, Oh! Her eyes lighting up.
How's your kitty cat?
she asked. That jogged Mau-Mau's memory. This was a girl who had helped catch the kitten since dubbed Admonisher of Thieves. Mau-Mau still didn't know her name. She's well. She lives at the medical office for the time being. The other girl grinned widely. She seemed to have a rich range of expressions, all highly communicative.
Oh, she's sweet. You were able to get some time off?
Shalon said, bouncing into the conversation between the two of them. These two must have already known each other. Come to think of it, Shisui was wearing the same uniform as Shalon, that of the Shangfu or wardrobe service. She must have gone to the laundry area pretty often. It was only through happenstance that Mau-Mau hadn't run into her before.
Yeah, they owe me at least this much.
You've got that right, Shalon said. It was an innocent, friendly conversation. Mau-Mau noticed the tea seller looking at them. She went ahead and bought all 3 of the remaining bulbs of jasmine tea and asked for them to be packed separately. The woman wasn't thrilled about that, but when Mau-Mau asked for one of the other leftover teas as well, she came around. Then Mau-Mau distributed the packages, one to Shalon and one to Shisui, keeping the last for herself. Maybe we should take our chat somewhere else so we don't get in the way, she suggested, and pointed toward the medical building. At the medical office, the quack doctor was gazing out at the marketplace enviously. As ever, he seemed to have a lot of time on his hands. The nature of his work kept him from leaving his office, even if hardly anyone ever showed up there. It must have been rough on him. He passed the time by helping the kitten groom herself. He was a very personable man, though, and when visitors did come, he bent over backwards to be hospitable to them. Gracious young lady, I had no idea you had friends. Not exactly a tactful thing to say, but then again, not untrue either. Shalon entered the doctor's office only with some trepidation, but her eyes lit up when she heard the cat say, meow. Shisui likewise had a gleam in her eye.
Aw, she's adorable, Shisui said. What's her name?
There was a long beat. Finally, Mau-Mau replied, Admonisher of Thieves.
Huh? What kind of weird name is that?
Just call her the kitten, then. Yes, the kitten. That was plenty. Calling her Mau-Mau was far weirder than the name the emperor had given her. Shalon and Shisui rarely visited the medical office. For one thing, they were normally too busy with work. Today, though, there was a festive atmosphere, and everyone was having a good time. As a precaution, the storehouse containing the most important medicines had been locked up. True, it was arguably problematic that Mau-Mau, who wasn't technically on the staff, knew where the key was, but if she told anyone, they would only hide it from her, and she didn't want that. Mau-Mau heated water while the quack prepared treats. She decided to use a quartz vessel instead of a teapot today. It was really for making medicine, not drinks, but when you had a high-quality tea like jasmine on hand, ceramic seemed like a waste. She used tepid water to warm the chilly vessel, then emptied it before placing a round bulb inside and pouring near-boiling water over it.
Oh, wow!
The girlish cry came from Shalon, who was impressed by the potent aroma that drifted from the opening bulb.
Mau-Mau, is that stuff you bought earlier?
Mau-Mau nodded. Shisui, for her part, was conspicuous by her silence. Maybe she'd seen jasmine tea before. You don't want the water to be boiling, just relatively warm, Mau-Mau said. Not that I have many chances to make it. The tea leaves would probably keep for a little while if necessary. The doctor appeared, solicitously offering rice crackers and mooncakes. The cakes were a bit large, so he cut them into pieces with a simple cleaver. Shalon's eyes were already shining as she tried to judge which slice was the biggest. Only moments ago, she'd seemed unsure whether it was even acceptable for her to come into the doctor's office. Now she was already chatting amiably with the quack. Maybe it was her youth that made her so adaptable. Shisui was also talking comfortably with him. The quack was clearly quite pleased. Many of the women in the rear palace treated men like him rather coolly because he was a eunuch, so meeting someone like Shalon must have been a relief. I do feel I should remind you young ladies that this isn't a playhouse. This is just this one time, okay? He repeated himself on this point several times. It seemed to be his roundabout way of telling them that, in fact, they were quite welcome to come again. He could hardly say it in so many words.
Is it like this every time? It's like one giant party out there,
Shisui said, taking a bite of mooncake. It reminded Mau-Mau that the other woman was the newest palace woman among them. Consort Lowland's arrival had brought a great many of them into the rear palace. Shisui had probably been there for less than 6 months.
Kind of. It seems to be going on longer than usual, though.
Shalon, the kitten on her knees, stuffed a mooncake into her mouth. The kitten was getting a little too interested in her crumbs, so Mau-Mau snatched her up and gave her some fish. Yes, the doctor said, clearing his throat importantly and brushing some crumbs from his loach-like mustache. A special embassy from another land will be visiting us soon, you see. Is he supposed to be telling us that? Mama wondered as she sipped her tea. She'd been eager to get her hands on some hot water, but she was starting to think it might have been a mistake to bring the other two girls to the medical office.
Wow, so someone really important will be coming,
Xiaolan said. Her eyes were shining once more, but Mama slipped another piece of mooncake onto the dish and Xiaolan's attention promptly switched to the new stack. Mama racked her brain for some other topic of discussion, but it was Shisui who saved the day.
Hey, there's been a weird smell coming from the northern quarter recently. Do you know anything about it?
A weird smell, you say? Well, that area isn't very well looked after. Maybe the sewer's backed up or something, the quack said. A blockage in the sewage tunnels could certainly create an odor that would be detectable above ground.
I haven't noticed. I never go to the northern quarter.
Xiaolan, making progress on her second helping of mooncake, said,
Do you have work there sometimes?
The grass just so happens to be especially thick in that area. Shisui grinned and took a bunch of paper from the folds of her robe. They looked like wrapping papers for snacks, but they were covered in ink drawings. Mama looked at them with interest, but Xiaolan and the doctor recoiled, for the pictures were detailed depictions of insects. A fine point brush had been used so that even the most subtle features were captured, and the name of each insect was inscribed carefully in the upper right corner of each image. That's great work, Mama said, and she meant it. There were no extraneous lines. The pictures looked fit for an encyclopedia. There were even careful depictions of the hind legs.
Thanks. One of the best things about this place is all the different bugs. I get lots of chances to draw them,
Shisui said, pleased to have found someone who understood her. Xiaolan and the quack, meanwhile, were trying hard not to look at the all-too-realistic depictions. Insects were another thing that could be used as medicinal ingredients. They didn't put too much emphasis on that back in the pleasure district. It tended to upset the ladies, but many insect-based remedies were quite effective. Praying mantis orchidae were an excellent vigor enhancer, while earthworms had antipyretic properties.
The fruit orchards to the south are too well tended to have many bugs, but there's lots in the northern quarter. It's very desolate, in a good way. There's lots of big spiders there.
Spiders? Mamo had heard that spider silk could help stop bleeding, but collecting the stuff was enough trouble that she hadn't had a chance to try it yet. Shisui's comment lit a fire in Mamo's eyes.
You want to see them? I can take you there.
I want to see them. Please take me there. Mamo and Shisui were weirdly in sync. Xiaolan and the doctor observed their conversation with detachment. The kitten, her tummy full, raised one of her hind legs and scratched behind her ears.